Hello and welcome to part 3 of my Cutthroat Caverns video tutorial and review series. In part 1 I showed you how to play the game, in part 2 I showed you some sample gameplay, and in part 3 I'm going to actually do what you call a traditional full video review. When I review a game, there are some points that I always, or pretty much I'm a stickler for. One of the biggest things I'm a stickler for is price value. Am I paying for a product that's a piece of junk, or am I paying good money for a game that's high quality with really good components that I don't feel like I'm playing with flimsy paper with? Another thing I like to look at is family friendliness. I'm a dad, I got some kids. I enjoy playing games with my kids, and I like to sit down and say, hey, is this a game I can play with my kids? Or is this a game that you can sit down and play with your kids? And just how old do those kids need to be before they play the game? And then finally, I'm going to give you my final thoughts on the game, where I'm going to tell you what I thought was good, what I thought was bad, and probably tell you some of the things that may make this a negative experience for some players and a positive for others. It's in my personal opinion that no board game is perfect for any person, any player, or any group, so I'm hoping I can hit all the points to help you decide if it's going to be a game for you. This is the most recent version of Cutthroat Caverns, and it does retail for $35, and that's the manufacturer's suggested price. Obviously, you're going to find this game a lot cheaper online by going to Amazon or some of the friendly online game stores that offer you a discount. So already you have a really good price point for entry into this game. The components that come with the game are really good quality. The cards themselves got while there's no artwork on them or anything to make them look really fancy, they are very well, high quality, made, done really well. Now these are thick cards with a good laminate on them. They're actually, I don't know the proper term for them, but they're a kind of cardstock that has a plastic film on them that makes them feel almost like, I guess the best thing to describe it is that photo paper that you can buy when you want to print out your own photos on your own printer. It's that thicker paper stuff that has that kind of film on it. Basically what I'm trying to say is these are thick cards, they're very hardy, very durable. You're not going to wear these cards out anytime soon. The box also comes with some cardboard tokens. Now most of these are going to be your prestige tokens, but they're also going to be used for two of the monsters that come with the game. There's the wolf that uses the wolf add-ons, and there's the boogans, which uses these boogans add-on tokens. Now I didn't show those for the gameplay because I don't want to ruin the game. I want to keep some surprises for you when you first play the game. Half the fun of playing this game, at least for me, was discovering all the special powers of all these monsters. So I don't want to ruin too much, but some of these monsters are going to come with friends to make them a little bit more challenging. Now they're just the friends represented by these cardboard tokens, and they're good cardboard stock. They got the same kind of laminate kind of feel that these cards do, and they're good quality. The game comes with 25 monsters, and these are on typical paper cardstock, not cardboard or anything thick, but at least it's got some full color artwork on them. Now I'm going to be honest, this artwork can be kind of hit or miss. It seems like, well, I'm not saying it seems like, because obviously it was done by different artists. There's different artists for all the different artwork on here, and you can definitely recognize different art styles by some of the different artists. Now I wouldn't say any of the artwork is bad, but you're definitely going to notice a style difference for a lot of these artworks. Some of it's going to look kind of comical, some of it's going to look kind of dark, some of it's going to look a little bit more cartoony, and some of it's going to have more of a realistic look to it, and some of it you're going to look at and just not quite know exactly what they were trying to do. So the artwork, while it may be hit or miss or different, at least there's a lot of artwork and there's a lot of gameplay variety, or I'm sorry, a lot of artwork variety here to at least keep things looking pretty cool. Each player is going to get their own player board, and now these are also just the same kind of paper that the bad guys are made of. Kind of your basic, just thicker than cardstock, but not quite cardboard or anything like that. There is some nice artwork on these, and this artwork was obviously done by the same artist because they all have the same art style. And I actually wouldn't mind if the entire game would have been done in this art style, because out of all the artwork, this was my favorite art style, and I'm going to get into the family friendliness in a minute with some of this artwork. But if they redo this entire game with this artist, whoever did this stuff, I would highly recommend that game most if you want to play this game with a family, but I'll get into that when I talk about my family friendliness of the game itself. Finally, the game does have the initiative cards, and thankfully the initiative cards are the same high quality cardstock as the basic cards, so as you saw, these cards are going to be abused a lot. They're going to be shuffled, rehanded out numerous times. Lucky they're that thicker cardstock, so they're going to last a while, so you don't have to worry about sleeving anything here. And heck, for 35 bucks, I don't care if I wear these cards down to the nub. I'll just buy another copy of the game for $35 in all honesty. Finally, you have the tracking board. This is the only piece of cardboard that comes with the entire game. It's good quality cardstock. It's hardy. You're not going to worry about that falling apart. And finally, you do get these glass beads to help you track the hit points of the heroes and the hit points of the monsters. Now, my only complaint about the components here is the use of these glass beads on all this glossy kind of material. Now, if I shake this a little bit without even really trying, you're going to see these glass beads are going to move around quite a bit. Now, I don't want to shake my table because my camera is attached to my table and I don't want you to think you're suffering through an earthquake here, but when you're playing the game, especially when you bring out a couple of beers, the table is going to be shook quite a bit and these beads are going to end up moving around. I would recommend, while these beads are kind of cool, I'd recommend finding something like maybe a wooden block or something that has a little more grit to prevent it from sliding around. Because otherwise, I can guarantee at least once per game, somebody's going to nudge the table and somebody's going to forget exactly where their hit points were on their hero or where it was on the monster board. Not a big deal, but it may be an annoyance for some players. The game does also come with a pretty cool insert that's going to come with the box. It's going to allow you to store everything inside the box, as well as for the cards, as well as for all the chits, and then everything fits on top right here. Everything fits back in the box and very, very well, nice and neatly, so you don't have to worry about anything sliding around. Package fits together very, very cool. They did a good job adding a nice insert, especially for the price margin. And then finally, we have the rule book for the game. Now, I'm happy to report, if you had the first edition of the game, that they fixed a lot of the small minor issues with the original rulebook. And not only that, and I don't remember if this was in the first edition, but in this edition they have a full round summary in the game, and I'm always giving props to whenever companies do this. I don't think companies realize how hard it is sometimes, especially for board game collectors who like to own multiple games, how hard it is to remember the exact summary of how to play a game, and nobody wants to constantly reread a rule book every time they invite friends over for game night. So I'm always happy whenever a game company throws in a flowchart with their games. It would be nice if more companies would do this, whether it's on a cardstock additive or somewhere, or just on the back of the rule book, or in this case in the center of the rule book. It's awesome when companies do this, and I'm very thankful when they do it, and it'd be nice if they do it more often. So I'm going to say props to Smitk and Dagger for taking the time to do this, because while this game is pretty easy, there are some timing issues, and if you follow this chart, you're not going to have any problems learning the game. Now, overall, I cannot complain about the component quality in any aspect for this game, considering this game you can probably get for about $25 on Amazon right now. And while I'd like to say it would have been nice if the player boards would have been a little bit thicker quality, or if there may have been some artwork on the cards or some just to spruce up a little bit, for $25 you cannot complain what you get with the game. You get an awesome insert. You get high quality cards that are not going to fall apart or fray on you anytime soon. They did a good job with the second edition of the rulebook. You got a lot of play variety with the monsters. There's 25 monsters that come with the game. You're only going to use 9 of them most of the time unless you get that blood mage. And again, I don't want to ruin too much of the surprise of the game, but when you have the blood mage is going to start summoning more monsters that you're going to have to fight, which is kind of cool. So overall, $35 manufacturer suggested retail price. $25 online price for all this gameplay. You cannot complain for the price, for the quality, for what you're getting with this game. Now, every time I review a board game, it's very important for me to discuss a couple things that I always want to make sure I mention every single video review I do. First thing I want to talk about is family friendliness. Like I said, I'm a father. I have 2 children I love to play my games with. So I like to discuss just how family friendly a board game is. Now, I know all board games do have their suggested minimum ages, but as we all know, they're not always 100% accurate, and sometimes there's some ways to modify games to make them more family friendly. The other thing I like to do is take a few moments to discuss perfect player count. Now, we have all heard a certain game bragged about how fun it is, how awesome that game is. We got all excited to go out there, we buy that game, we bring it home, we sit down with our play group, and the game falls apart. And the reason why it falls apart is because the person who suggested it, or the review we saw, didn't take time to mention that, yes, Cosmic Encounter is a fantastic game, it's a lot of fun, but with 5 players, it's awesome. You play with 3 players, not so much. Another good example would be Battlestar Galactica. Probably one of the best hidden mechanic or hidden trader mechanic games out there for 5 players. Definitely not a game I'd recommend for 3 players. And while there are some mods out there that allow you to play with 2 players, I definitely would not play it that way. On the family friendliness front, this game plays gameplay-wise is actually very, very family-friendly. Now, while there's lots of backstabbing and betrayal, it's mostly tongue-in-cheek, and it's out there, and it's the theme of the game, and it fits the theme of the game. Unfortunately, though, younger players aren't always fans of having a game where they can be picked on or where they become the victim of things, and that's one of the things you have to think about if you're deciding if you want to play this game with a family or not. Cutthroat Caverns does say it's a game for 14 and up on the box, but when you open it up and read the rule book, it actually says for 12 and up. Kind of a funny little difference there. I think they really meant for 12 and up, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with that in this instance here. And I'm going to say 12 and up is a perfectly fine age to play Cutthroat Caverns because the mechanics are very simple and the artwork isn't too gruesome for a 12-year-old. But once you start getting down to a 7 or 8-year-old, the graphics and the images in the game may not be the best thing for younger eyes to see. While some of the artwork in the game can be fairly cartoony, such as Spite, some of the artwork can get a little more graphics, showing blood or a little bit darker images or almost stuff I'd expect to see in a child's nightmare. And that's kind of how the artwork is in for this game. It's obvious that they use different artists throughout the game, and while it's not a bad thing, it does create a little bit of an inconsistency on what kind of eyes you want to see in the game overall. I know I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for saying this, but I would actually like to see Cutthroat Caverns get the same treatment that Catacombs is currently getting. Catacombs is currently being redone to make the artwork in the game much more family friendly. And I know some people are a little bit unhappy about it, but for people who have kids, we're actually excited about this because that means we can pull out these games with our kids and start enjoying them. If Cutthroat Caverns ever came out with a new edition that had more, well, I'm not a fan of the cartoony artwork. If it had more of the cartoony artwork, I would actually buy a second copy of this game just so I can play it with my kids and have fun. Now, the caveat to that, of course, is you need to make sure you have kids who are okay with mechanics where stabbing each other in the back and betraying the other players is pretty much the norm. Now, my kids are pretty much used to it because I've raised them to understand that, hey, that's part of the game and not to take offense, not get upset. But unfortunately, that's not going to work for all kids. Some kids don't like that kind of gameplay, and this game is basically built on that kind of gameplay. You're supposed to stab each other in the back, you're supposed to break promises to each other, and you're supposed to smile while you twist a dagger in the other player's back. It's all part of the gameplay. Just understand that if you have a child who doesn't like that and they will feel picked on, this is probably not going to be the right game for that child. Having said all that, I can definitely say that the mechanics-wise, Cutthroat Caverns can definitely be played by an 8 or 9-year-old pretty darn easily, and they can figure out the gameplay and enjoy the game. Just make sure that they're a child that you don't mind seeing the images on the artwork, and also make sure that it's a child who doesn't mind the mechanics of being ganged up on or stabbed in the back or betrayed or anything else along those lines, because that's how Cutthroat Caverns plays. Also, this game does have player elimination. If a player runs completely out of hit points, which means they're brought down to 0 hit points, they are out of the game and they're pretty much going to be set on the side watching everybody else play. Now, I do have a couple of homebrew rules to kind of help avoid that situation, and I'll talk about those in a few moments when I give my final opinions on the game. But just understand the game is designed to have player elimination, and while the mechanics are pretty much designed that you don't eliminate a player early, it is an eventual goal is for you to eliminate any player who has more prestige points than you, because they're going to beat you if they're not thrown out of the game somehow. So that is built into the mechanics, so just understand that is how the game plays. Cutthroat Caverns is a game for 3 to 6 players, and your opinion on the various player counts is going to depend on how you feel about certain kind of games. Now, in my personal opinion, I think Cutthroat Caverns plays best as a 4 or 5 player game. As a 6-player game, it is fun, it is chaotic, but once you start getting to the hour and a half, close to 2-hour mark, which this game can run up to, depending on which kind of bad guys you're fighting, the game can feel like it's overstayed its welcome. That's why as a 6-player game, it has fallen apart sometimes as a 6-player game. Now, there are ways to modify that, and again, I'll mention that when I give my final opinions in the game, but just understand, as a 6-player game, the game can overstay its welcome. It's kind of like playing Munchkin for more than 30 seconds. Okay, bad joke. More like playing Munchkin for more than 15 minutes. The jokes are good for the first 15 minutes, but after that, it just feels like it's overstayed its welcome. And in my opinion, with 6 players, the game can sometimes feel that way. Not always, but occasionally it can happen. In my opinion, 5 players seems to be the perfect player count because it's going to allow you to screw with the other players, and you're going to get enough player interaction through all the cards, and a lot of these monsters seem like they were designed to hammer on more than 3 players, so it's going to feel like it's working out a little bit better for you. As a 4-player game, the game is still really good, but as a 3-player game, I think the game loses something because you're going to have a little bit less player interaction, and things aren't going to feel like, well, the game just doesn't feel like it's 100% designed as a 3-player game. Now, I'm not saying the game is bad as a 3-player game. I'm just saying that whenever I play with 3 players, I make sure I go through the monster deck, and I usually pick about 15 of the best monsters that are good for a 3-player game, and I shuffle up those 15 to make sure I pick my 9 for the players to fight against. Doing that helps improve the game for 3 players a lot in that aspect. Basically what I'm saying is this game has enough randomness in it through the different variety of the monsters that's going to basically affect how you're going to enjoy this game as a 3-player game and as a 6-player game. If you want to really enjoy this game as a 3-player game, I definitely say you modify the encounter deck. If you want to enjoy this game as a 6-player game, again, I would definitely say adjust the encounter deck and it's still going to play really enjoyably at those player counts. If you want to keep the full randomness of the game, I definitely would say this game plays best as a 4 or 5-player game. Now, before I give you my final thoughts on Cutthroat Caverns, I want to let you know that we do have a house rule when we play Cutthroat Caverns. And the reason why we add this rule is because there was one little bit of randomness, and I kind of discussed this in the player count, that can creep up in this game that may cause us to choose one little home rule to help improve the gameplay for us. Now, as I showed you when I showed you how to play Cutthroat Caverns, you're basically going to shuffle up 9 monsters from the monster deck, and then the player's going to go through all 9 of those monsters and see if they can survive to the final encounter. The only problem with this way of playing the game is the fact that the game can be pretty anticlimactic, especially if your final monster happens to be the riddle room or something like that, or a mob that's not really going to hose the players, and it's going to pretty much cause an anticlimactic ending. Because the basic gameplay, or I should say the basic flow of the game is, for the first, call it 5 encounters, the players are going to be kind of nickel and diming each other, but nobody's going to go overboard, because this game is definitely going to kick you in the teeth if you decide to go all out on the other players and try to knock them out early. The game is designed that you have to work together, at least in the first couple of encounters. If you don't work together in the first couple of encounters, nobody's going to make it to the 9th encounter because everybody's going to be pretty much dead. So the basic flow of the game is for the first 5 or so encounters, all the players are going to be kind of nickel and diming each other. And then by the time you get to the 7th and 8th encounter, you want to make sure that whoever has the most prestige also happens to be the person who's the most wounded, so by the 8th or the 9th encounter, they can be defeated, so they lose the game. Unfortunately, sometimes there can be a little bit of randomness with the encounters. You end up with a final encounter, which isn't really much of a tough encounter, and then the person who ever had the most prestige ends up walking away with the game. Short version of all this is what we do is we pick every player when we play the game. We're going to fan out all the big baddies that come with the game. And every person gets to pick one of their favorite big baddies that they want to be the final encounter for the game. So in a 5-player game, we're going to pick 5 really tough final big baddies. In a 6-player game, we're going to pick 6. In a 3-player game, we're going to pick 3 of them. We're then going to shuffle all 3, 4, 5, 6 of those together. And then we're going to take one that's going to be placed face down, and that's going to be the 9th encounter. Nobody knows what that 9th encounter is. And then the remaining cards are going to be shuffled back into the monster deck, where we're going to pick the other 8 monsters from. Now, like I said, the reason why we did this is because we got kind of frustrated with occasionally, and it was very rare, but when it did happen, it was anticlimactic. We didn't like that bad final encounter that wasn't much of a challenge. This pretty much guaranteed that the final encounter was a nice challenge and kept in our minds the spirit of the game. Now, first off, Cutthroat Caverns is an awesome beer and pretzels type of game. Not even talking about just a game for a game group. This is an awesome beer and pretzels kind of game. Kind of game where you sit down with some friends, have a couple of beers, and then start ribbing each other, taunting each other, and basically have a lot of fun. It's not the only way to play this game, but it is awesome and definitely in part of my shelf where I keep my beer and pretzel kind of games, because it's always been a winner as that kind of game. But I do want to give it one caveat to that. Some of these monsters can be a little bit tough to figure out once you got a good buzz going, so make sure you play this game with at least one player who knows how to play these monsters really well, and then have a lot of fun playing the game. The game itself also has a lot of replay value. These monsters are pretty much the stars of the game. Now, while this is a game all about backstabbing, the monsters are definitely ones who take center stage. There is a lot of variety with these monsters, and they're going to make sure the game never plays the exact same way twice. You have monsters such as Hate. Hate's strength and his hit points are going to be based on the amount of cards discarded by the players. And whoever plays the highest attack card also gets to be the player 1 for the next round. So there's kind of a nice balancing act when you play Hate. Do you play a low attack card hoping Hate doesn't have a lot of hit points? But since he's worth a lot of prestige, if you play a low attack card to judge how many hit points he's going to have, that's going to pretty much guarantee whoever the first player is, they can probably get a kill off and get 5 free prestige, making him a very high prestige and easy kill. So does everybody play a 40 attack card, and then in a 6-player game, that's going to mean he's going to end up with over 200 hit points, or does it make it a tougher fight? It's kind of an interesting mechanic, and it's one of the cool things that hate does, making him a really cool monster. Then you have monsters such as Spite. Spite's going to attack all the players who happen to play the highest attack cards against her, and then those highest attack cards are actually going to be removed from the damage stack, making it so she takes a long time to kill. In a 6-player game with 300 hit points, you're looking at a very long, drawn-out fight just to defeat her. And then you have Fear. Fear is a very nasty monster. Every single round that he happens to stay alive, he's going to do more damage and gain more hit points, making him an extremely tough monster that you want to defeat as quickly as possible to get him out of the game. Then you have monsters such as the Archmages. The Archmages are pretty cool. They had a little neat mechanic saying that every player in order has to do more damage than the prior player. If you fail to do more damage to the Archmages than the player who attacked before you prior in the initiative round, the combat round is going to be over. You're going to end that combat round, you're going to take 15 points of damage, and every player who hasn't attacked this round is also going to take 15 points of damage, making these another very nasty creature. Then you have creatures such as the Wolf Pack, which is going to come into play with a whole bunch of little helpers, which can be represented by the tokens. And you have a number of these tokens based on the amount of players in the game, +1. So in a 6-player game, you need to fight 7 of these wolves. Each of them has 40 hit points. There's also trap cards and more cards. The gas bag, which is a very cool card, which means that somebody has to basically sacrifice themselves for the next combat in an effort to make the party advance into the rest of the dungeon. So as you can see, there is a heck of a lot of variety between all these monsters. There are 25 monsters in here, and it's safe to say that every one of these monsters plays just ever so slightly different. And again, you're only going to use 9 of these monsters every time you play the game, so there's a phenomenal amount of replay value in this game, just in the monsters in the base set. And I didn't mention this yet, but there are 3 expansions for this game. Actually, now, maybe there's 4 now. I don't quite sure. Somebody's going to have to double check me on that one. But there are multiple expansions, and these expansions add more monsters, and they give the players special abilities. One of the only negatives I have with the base game is that all the heroes are basically cookie cutters of each other. The expansion started giving the players extra special abilities that only they can use, adding more replay and more fun to the game. I also like how they designed all these monsters to guarantee that there's no such thing as a bad hand. Some of these monsters are going to penalize you for having low cards in your hand. Some of these monsters are going to penalize you for only having high cards in your hand. And some of these monsters are going to penalize you for attacking too soon, too late, or anything like that. Meaning that basically there's no such thing as a bad hand in this game. You're going to get your hand before you even find out what you're fighting. So that kind of adds kind of a nail-biting kind of decision effect to the game where you need to decide, okay, what kind of hand do I want before I attack this monster? And hopefully I got the right variety in my hand to help me defeat the upcoming encounter. Smitk and Dagger games went through a lot of trouble to make sure that they had a game that had a lot of balance, a way to balance the game mechanics, which is amazing for such a potentially chaotic game. You never feel like you don't have a chance. There's always some kind of what-if scenario to lend hope to your hand. If you perhaps only have high cards in your hand, maybe you'll happen to turn over an encounter that hits anybody who uses weaker cards against it. If you don't happen to have any high damage cards, maybe you'll get lucky and get a lucky initiative card. Terrible luck the first few fights, that's okay. Later fights give bonus prestige points. There's always counterbalances in this game to make sure that nobody's going to have a absolute runaway with it early in the game. This game has a fantastic back and forth seesaw feel with it, with tons of built-in checks to make sure that there's always a chance, except of course when there isn't, because you're dead. A good example of this was the most recent game I played at Cutthroat Caverns. I was in the lead the entire game, only to have the last place player tie the game on the final encounter, sending the party into overtime. And anytime you have overtime, you basically have to draw encounter cards until there's no longer a tie in the game. The funny thing about this, though, is the next encounter that we flipped over was actually played by, or defeated by, the player who was in second place, who managed to go from second place to first place and win the game. So it's pretty interesting. I started off the entire game in first place. Towards the end, the person in third place managed to pull up and tie me in first place, and in the end, the player in the second place won the game. That's just a perfect example of how this game is never over until it's over. I also cannot emphasize enough the deviousness this game creates. It's nearly impossible to win this game if you let your teammates die before the halfway point. But of course, a few bumps and bruises, helps build a little bit of character, and that's part of the fun of the game. The counter to this, though, is that if you overly help, the runaway leader is going to basically run away with the game. This can occasionally become a problem, but luckily the added prestige bonus from later encounters helps to counteract this in all but the most rarest of instances. Nothing's going to ever stop a ring of bad luck, but most of the time, the game's got a whole bunch of built-in checks and balances to make sure that it's not going to happen to you all the time. Now, I do have a couple of negatives with the game. The first one I've already mentioned. I wasn't a big fan of the cookie cutterness of all the heroes. All these heroes are exactly the same. They all have the exact same amount of extra attack cards in the decks. They all have 4 bonus attack cards in the deck. They're all for the exact same amount. They have the access to the exact same cards. They have no special abilities over any of the creatures at all. They're all basically exact cookie cutters of each other. Luckily, this was remedied with the first expansion to give each one of the players bonus special powers. Now, if you do plan on going out and buying this game and you plan on getting all the expansions, I would probably actually suggest you skip the very first expansion. And I'm saying this only if you plan on getting all the expansions with the game. Now, the main reason why I say this is the first expansion, while it adds special powers to all the heroes, the most recent expansion that came out actually removes those special powers and replaces them, and it plays a little bit differently. So the only thing really you're getting out of the first expansion is extra creatures. And while some of them are very, very cool, if you're looking to be smart with your money and conservative, but still want to get the most enjoyment out of this game, I would say buy the base set, skip the first expansion, get the second, third, and fourth expansion, and you're going to get the most enjoyment you can out of this game. I'm also not a big fan of the glass beads. Now, while I think they're kind of cool, I think they're kind of wonky by the fact that if somebody bumps the table, these beads are going to get moved over. It's not going to happen all the time, but you have a couple beers, it's going to happen. Okay, it's going to happen pretty much every time you have people having beers playing this game. I can guarantee you at least once per game, somebody's going to nudge the table or bump something, and these beads are basically going to be readjusted. Probably not a big deal for a lot of players, but some people might get annoyed or frustrated with it after a while. If it becomes a major problem for you, grab some scratch paper or maybe find something that's not exactly glass that has a little more of a grip on these cards so they don't slide around quite as easily. Again, it's my only minor negative with the components for the game, but it is something that can creep up. Sometimes the fickleness of fate can also hamper your enjoyment of the game. Usually when it's a series of bad cards, it's not too bad, but if you get an anticlimactic final boss, it can pretty much really ruin the gameplay experience and kind of bring it down. That's why we incorporated that home rule I told you about a little bit. Once we included that, we've never had that problem again with just the bad luck of that final draw. Because in all honesty, if you get 2 traps as your final 2 encounters, it's not that exciting. That's why I strongly suggest that if you are interested in Cutthroat Caverns, you implement that little suggested homebrew rule that we have. It's definitely going to increase your enjoyment. Also, the art in the game can be a little bit hit or miss, and again, maybe a lot of it is a style thing, but some of the art just didn't work for me. For example, the gas bag, I didn't really like that much. Another one that really didn't seem to fit too well was Spite. You look at Spite, pretty much a cartoony thing, then you get Hate, which seems kind of like an, I don't know, actually I liked it. It's kind of a pencil sketch or something like that, but or charcoal drawing, looks kind of cool. Then you get things such as the Riddle Room, which is definitely a much different art style than Spite. Then you get the Necromancer, which is almost kind of cartoony with his oversized fingers. Then you get Medusa, which seems like something I'd expect to see in a more of a darker graphic fantasy novel of some kind. So you can see that the artwork is definitely not consistent. Again, not bad, but it's definitely not 100% consistent. And now finally we come to my 2 major gripes I actually have with Cutthroat Caverns. The very first major gripe I have with the game is player elimination. Now, I understand why it was included in this game, but in my opinion, player elimination is not always a good thing anytime you have a game that can run an hour or an hour and a half. I have one suggestion on how to fix it. Actually, 2 suggestions. Again, more homebrew rules that we included, but they seem to be making things a little bit better for the people who are not fans of player elimination, including me. Now, as I said earlier, the game does have some built-in checks and balances to make sure that a player shouldn't be eliminated too early. But let's face it, there's the fickleness of fate. Sometimes you're going to have bad luck, and sometimes the monsters are going to start attacking. And unfortunately, you're going to be the victim of those attacks, and your hit points are going to start dropping pretty quickly. And those items that heal you are very few, very far between, and there's only so many in the deck, and once they're used up, they're gone for the rest of the game. Generally, you shouldn't be eliminated too early in the game, at least not before the 6th encounter, but it can happen occasionally, and when it does, it sucks to sit off to the side while everybody else is having fun. 2 solutions on ideas on how to fix this for you if it becomes too much of a problem. First solution we came up with, and so far it seems pretty balanced and seems to work out pretty well. If you are killed, you can be resurrected for 1 loss of prestige point per 10 hit points you want to come back with. So if you want to come back with 50 hit points, it's going to cost you 5 prestige points. If you want to come back with 100 hit points, it's going to cost you 10 prestige points. That is enough to make enough of a difference to help you still feel like you might still have a chance to win the game, but it's definitely not going to be such a deal breaker that it's going to make it so that other players are going to feel like death has no penalty. We've used that sample idea quite a few times, and so far it feels like it's balanced out pretty well. At least that's been our experience for our play group. Your play group may be a little bit differently. Go ahead and play around with it, see how that works for your play group. Oh, and we do allow you to go negative when we allow this. So if you happen to be only at 5 prestige points, if you only happen to be at 0 prestige points because you've had a lot of bad luck and you don't have the prestige points to pay to come back to life, we pretty much allow you to go negatives. But again, this is a house rule. It's not in the rule book. Another option there is to have less encounters and have the player start off with less hit points. What we've done before, and this wasn't our most popular suggestion, but it was something that we have tried a few times, is that instead of players starting with 100 hit points, each of the players starts with 75 hit points, and then we only play through 7 encounters. That kind of guarantees that if somebody does have some bad luck and they get kicked out of the game early, at least they don't have to wait through 9 encounters for the game to end. Again, if player elimination is a problem for you, these are 2 suggestions I'd like to pass on to you and let you try with your play groups and see what you think. And finally, this game has the potential to fall flat with very overly analytical gamers who prefer less randomness in their games. This game can be chaotic, and that is part of the fun and the attraction of the game. There is enough potential randomness that it can be impossible to win the game. You can have bad card draws, bad initiative draws, a nasty series of monsters, and occasional runaway leaders are all things that can creep up occasionally during a game of Cutthroat Caverns. I have had the rare games of Cutthroat Caverns where it's been pretty much doom and gloom and a player was left in the dust and pretty much knew they didn't stand a chance of winning. Of course, this is much more frequent in 3-player games and happens a lot less in 5- and 6-player games. And I've also seen the same scenario where somebody says, I don't have a chance early in the game, and they manage to play pretty luckily and pull ahead and manage to win the game. And of course, this swinginess also seems to happen more often in 3-player games. Seems a lot more rare in 5- and 6-player games. The game itself is random, and while it's designed with some balancing mechanics thrown in, the simple fact is that this is a game that plays best with more players. The players will themselves curtail the runaway leader, and they will help keep things balanced. And with less players, the occasional randomness of dumb luck is going to rear its head more and more often. If this bothers you, I recommend sticking to the game with 4, 5, or 6 players. If you can get past this, then the game plays perfectly fine with only 3 players. The bottom line here is that Cutthroat Caverns does a great job being an enjoyable group game full of backstabbing, plenty of taunting, and many take that moments that will have you cursing your best friends' names. Just realize that there's the potential for some bad luck, but if you look past these pitfalls, you'll be rewarded with a great game for larger groups that doesn't overstay its welcome, but also doesn't evolve into mindless screwage. Know your game group well and know the fun of Cutthroat Caverns. This has been another off-the-shelf board game review, looking at Cutthroat Caverns, where I've taught you how to play, showed you some gameplay examples, and given you my final opinion of the game. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the YouTube comments section below. If you have any requests, feel free to pass them on. I'll see what I can do to get those videos made. Thanks for watching.